So I think maybe what we should do is give a bit of an overview of what we plan on doing in this little podcast that we have.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I can kind of kick things off, but the goal of this is to have super honest conversations, transparent conversations, direct, about what we're seeing in the market, what we're seeing from our customer base of staffing companies, and then give like kind of insider knowledge of different tactics that you could use, or kind of advice of how you should approach your lead sources or recruiting tactics. And then all the kind of pitfalls that we find working with different staffing companies, the things that maybe they're doing wrong or doing right, and the things that kind of might bother us as vendors towards with these staffing companies.
Yeah, and I think as a good flow, if we can stick to the list, at least it'll keep us kind of both on the same flow. The hot topic list, I have that pulled up on a second tab here. Like, it's essentially broken. You did a great job breaking it into like data, training, market dynamics, and kind of navigating lead sources within the market. So maybe we could try to group them in there just so we're somewhat like, it's going to be easier for you to clip up too. Like if all, you know what I'm saying? If we're kind of like hit the big points and then kind of drill down into specifics, it's going to be, I think it's going to flow better,
Perfect. I love it.
So, I mean, it's up to you what you want to start with. We could start with data and work our way down. I mean, data seems like a good place to start because
let's do that.
If that's not right, then the rest of it's not right.
Let's do that. Absolutely. So on the topic of data, I think the first one that's really important is around lead attribution. I'll share with you what I find with staffing companies that we work with. I'd say that there's two big buckets of staffing companies. There's the type of staffing company that doesn't really have good data quality within their applicant tracking system, or maybe has built an internal applicant tracking system or doesn't have one at all. That bucket of staffing company, I think, is almost always wrong when it comes to lead attribution for placements, and they make completely wrong decisions around where their placements are coming from. A lot of times it hurts us as a business because we price per placement, because their data tracking is just completely off. And I think what this comes down to is a couple things. One is kind of the culture of the organization. So if the organization is primarily a sales function where they know how to recruit, but they don't necessarily have a strong marketing function that is deep in the data, they don't know how to do attribution. And if the marketing person is not kind of a very skilled marketing person, they're not going to be able to catch these pitfalls of lead attribution. The biggest issue I find is that they're making completely wrong decisions around their lead sources. What I find is that larger organizations fit into a second category, which is they are very competent when it comes to data. They more or less understand attribution. But even with large organizations, the interesting thing is that I find that it's unclear how they should count placements. So like, is it first touch attribution? Is it last touch? Is it something in between? So it gets really confusing even for larger organizations.
Yeah, and you hit it right on. So some of this is what I call like, it's almost like a confirmation bias, right? So you have the data and you have the marketing teams kind of, whether it be right, wrong, or indifferent or attribution issues, they have kind of, they see the data, they want to see it. They see what they want out of the data. A couple good examples of this would be like, we have a partner that we work with that, we're going over placements and it just didn't add up. So we asked them to send us a list of their entire placements for 60 days, every source. And they put all the sources in there. They sent it over. We signed NDAs, did all that stuff, right? And when we went back and we washed it through our platform, we asked our platform to say, hey, if we've ever sent them this candidate, mark it. And if they don't have us as an attribution, mark it. And it ended up adding about 30% extra placements on there. And here's what was wild. Do you know what they attributed the source to? It's basically internal, their own website, right? So when we dug deeper, what we found out was happening is as these leads, didn't close immediately, these specific candidates, they would then put them into a nurture campaign or a re-engagement campaign. They'd send the re-engagement campaign back to their website. They'd fill out a website form, which would overwrite the attribution. And now that becomes a placement made because they sent an email out, right? Not because we sent it to them. So, that's pretty cut and dry. Like you and I would probably be like, well, yeah, obviously that came from TravelNurseSource. But, with these partners, with some of the organizations, they're, well, no, that's its own source. The re-engagement is its own attribution. You didn't get that. We got that. And, whether a recruiter picks up the phone, you send an email or a text, it's not really a marketing source. It's a tactic. It's like, so even to your point, even if the data is right, like, there's still going to be this a little bit of back and forth. Was it the billboard, the TV, or the radio that made you go and buy that thing? So it's a really difficult conversation, even when the data is correct to have.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing, which is if you lean towards last touch attribution, your last touch attribution is rarely going to be like one of these sources that originally brought in the lead.
Right.
It might be an internal recruiter, or it might be a referral, or it might be another lead source, or whatever else. And the tricky thing is that a lot of ATSs come out of the box with their own attribution models. So LaborEdge, for example, has out of the box attribution. They have an original referral source and the current referral source. So if you're relying on the referral sources that come out of the box with LaborEdge and not doing your own analysis on attribution, you're going to end up making wrong decisions on where placements are legitimately coming from.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time working with LaborEdge to try to get this kind of sorted out for some of our clients, because another thing that we've seen with LaborEdge, our platform specifically, we have jobs and we have leads. We have two different classifications of candidates that we send over: people that apply for jobs and people that are in market audience. And if it's applying to a job, that's an easy enough thing for LaborEdge to do. But if it's a candidate that's not attached to a specific job, and if they already have it, there's not a really great way to resurface that within their workflow, as if they're applying to a different job. So what we were having in reality, initially, it's better now because we work with them to fix it, and they've been great to work with to get this kind of rectified. But we are finding that a good 40% of our leads, in the LaborEdge ecosystem weren't essentially, they were in there, they just weren't surfacing the way they would like a new candidate. So we were having clients, for example, they wouldn't surface into reporting, they wouldn't go into workflow. So we've had to kind of work with our clients, and that brings up a really good point. Like, all of our partners really prefer to stay in their own ecosystem and stay in their own ATS and work their things that way. There is something to be said for auditing that data against the original source. So whether it be logging into the platform or contacting the vendor, whether it be us, you, Vivian Wonderly, and say, look, I show 2,000 candidates sent to me this month. What do you show? And it should line up. It should line up. And if it doesn't, then, to me, that's like the first step in the, kink in the hose, right? And whenever we have a problem with performance, that's the first thing I check is like, are you getting all the leads? And I would say about 30% of the time, it's not the case. And it's not necessarily that we're not sending them or you're not sending them, for example. It's generally either an ATS or an API issue on the partner side, or rules that they have set up to disqualify or not bring in, usually duplicates. But in the travel healthcare market, what is a duplicate? It's a nurse that's applying again. You would want them. We have so many candidates or so many clients that only place a value on what they consider net new candidates. And that doesn't make sense to me in a market where every 13 weeks they're a new candidate. I'm sure you probably face the same thing.
That. And it's especially the case with larger organizations. So if you're a staffing company that does a few $100 million per year in sales, your database size is so large that any candidate that you get from one of these lead sources, there's a good chance it already exists within your ATS.
Right.
And if it already exists within your ATS, that doesn't mean that you would have gotten the placement without the support of one of these channels. So if they came through and they applied on Indeed, for example, that doesn't mean Indeed didn't contribute, even though the lead already exists in your ATS.
Right. Because you could also flip that backwards. Youssef, you could also flip that backwards to be like, one client once, we just were on a call last week with a client who said, we don't count success to any lead that we already have in our database, because if we already had them in our database, we are going to place them. I'm like, that's not true, because they came to my site and applied or to somewhere else. Now, it was your previous relationship that benefited you in having that make that decision. But what if we, as platforms, what if we were unethical, for example, which we're not, but what if we were, and we did the opposite, right? So I can make an argument that if a partner is not going to value our lead placement through someone they've already received, I can make the argument or the logic in the platform to send them to someone else that doesn't have it. So I could receive, we're not unethical. We wouldn't do that. Same thing for your pay-per placement model, right? Like if they are going to make a comment about, somebody, we've already received this, or they worked with us 8 months ago, we're not going to pay it again. Well, then, Vivian Vetted or TravelNurseSource, for example, could make a conscious decision to promote other jobs instead, but we don't, because we're honest partners. And, it's something that's really frustrating, because it's not the candidate that you're paying for, it's the intent and the revenue behind it.
Exactly that. Yeah, I think the biggest unlock for us has been realizing that the value in these candidates is kind of knowing their specialty, knowing their contact information, but also knowing when they're looking for work.
Right.
And that's the intent piece, which is if you have a massive database, let's imagine you have 2 million nurses in your database, that actually doesn't matter because you don't know who's looking for work. And that's the most important, that's the intent piece. That's the most important piece of trying to put them to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the attribution is a big sticking issue. But again, it's this, what we've started doing with the clients is not all of them, but when we have, performance check-ins, we're asking them to send us, lists of all their placements just for like a 30-day, just a touch point on the data. Not, we're not doing anything nefarious with it, but we want to wash that through and see if the way they're collecting data is accurate. Because if it's not, it sets up the relationship to be a negative relationship right from the get-go. Yeah. And we really want to make sure we're on the same page. And even in instances where we found 20, 30, 40%, we just had a client that, like I said, another one that they showed X amount of placements. And when we went through the math and did the attribution, again, it's a referral or internal attribution that accounted for an extra 50% of placements. I mean, a 50% increase in placements completely changes your return on investment and how you think of a partner. So, but even with that said, there's still that back and forth of, well, was it you or was it our text message that did it? And it's like, no, it was your text message because of us. So, you wouldn't have been able to text message them without the candidate. So, it's hard, but.
And the tricky thing is, like, you guys price per lead and we price per placement for a lot of our customers. And the tricky thing is that there isn't this incentive to accurately report back placements when you price per placement. Correct. Like, you're always trying to debate placements and the attribution of those so that you can lower your bill. Yeah. Like, to some extent, I understand the perspective of the marketing person of trying to do that. Yeah. But also, if you're incorrectly attributing placements, then you're not allocating funds to the channels that will make your business grow. So you do have to kind of really, really deep dive into lead attribution and make sure that it's correct. It's being kind of followed across all channels that you're using so that you can make the right marketing decisions to grow your business.
Yeah, and that's right. And to be even more like, philosophical too, like, in a pay per placement model, there is so much that you as a platform are depending on your partners for. Whether it be, data integrity or working the lead or being able to execute on that promise of placing them, like, it really is a shared partnership. And if you have to go into that partnership with like utmost transparency, utmost trust, and both parties have to be really rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. And that open communication and trust and transparency is 100% necessary, because without that, right, it's not really a partnership. And you can make the argument that, if the clients are doing everything they can to mask their costs, which I get, they don't want to spend more money than they have to spend, especially in this market. But that's not it's cheating, right? It's not the basis of a good, solid, transparent partnership. And there are going to be times where it goes the other way. And I think I'll give you a good example. We had a client that their attribution was wrong the other way, where it said like we placed more than we actually did. And, somebody in our team's like, well, should we tell them? I'm like, yeah, we have to tell them. We're a good partner, right? So trust is so important. And I think if you have a partner that all they want to do is look for every reason not to be fair in this regard, then I question, like, is that, for my business, right? Like, is that a good partner for this particular product? Then maybe they need to pay per lead. Then maybe they need to be on one of our other plans. But specifically, as we're moving to pay per placement as well, we don't want to have that friction point every candidate, every check. It's really, really hard. And, other competitors that will remain nameless, for now, have a very black and white, aggressive kind of modeling around that. And it does kind of make sense that way, because otherwise you're just battling forward. And these agencies are too busy. The platforms are too busy to do this. And it really erodes that partnership. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. Like with placements reporting, we've tried to be very fair and very friendly around placement reporting, because we don't want a sour relationship with a staffing company. So if somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, we were in touch with this lead before," or whatever else, we try to be very friendly and fair in that regard. With some of our competitors, they are much more black and white, and they're black and white because they don't want to have this debate on a monthly basis of whether or not you should attribute placements to them. Now, I think there is a middle ground to doing this. I don't think it should be black and white, and that, and I think we sometimes are very friendly and perhaps too friendly when it comes to attribution. But there definitely is a middle ground to it. I think the other tricky part is that if you're a marketing manager at a staffing company, you don't have the incentive to dig through a bunch of data for one of your vendors.
Right.
Um, like why should I take time out of my day to do extra work for this single vendor to dig through all this data and make sure that placements are being reported accurately? There
Yeah.
is no incentive for that person to do the work, and that just results in errors.
Well, if you think about it too, like that extra workload, it could be the ethos behind that could be, I want to make sure that we're not being overcharged, which, for an error, which that's kind of fine and responsible. But then there's that other kind of negative ethos of like, we're going to see what we can get away with and not pay. And you're right. We've had clients and partners that are on this plan, and specifically with an unnamed competitor, and they spend days going through, and they spend even more days and countless emails going back and forth with that vendor. And it is, as they described it, a full-time job. And, no one's got time for that. In this economy, no one's got time for that. And I have heard, just to give you props, Youssef, we have shared clients, and I know some clients that use you, and they have all commented how fair you are in this regard, and they wish that other competitors were like you in that regard. So kudos there.
Yeah. I guess if you were to come up with a lead attribution model that works across all staffing companies, that is extremely fair, and it's a very clear indicator of where they should be allocating funds, what attribution model would you come up with?
So I think a billing window where it's like, whether it be 3 or 6 months, if you get them in that window and you place them, it's fair game. And people are going to say, well, what if they went to Vetted and TravelNurseSource and a week from apart each other, we have to write 2 checks? And I think there needs to be a solve for that, whether it be a split fee or something that's a little bit more palatable. But on the same hand, my argument to that would be, what about the other thousands of leads that we've sent you that aren't going to place in that billing window, that you are going to actualize revenue later? My assertion is it will more than balance out, if not pay tenfold in the future. I'll give you a good example. We have a client that if you look at their placements from this year, you get one number. If you look at placements from this year from leads they received in previous years, that number is two to 3 times what they got, because they've been with us for 10 years. So they have 85,000 candidates from us, and they're engaging that database, and they're still popping leads off and placements off that they wouldn't have gotten without them. So does that more than covers their service plan, their fee? And I get the same thing. Even if you have to pay full price to Vivian or Vetted or TravelNurseSource or Wonderly or whatever, you're still going to be able to hit those leads up for years and not have to pay anything. Yeah. So it does even out, in my opinion.
I think for a marketing person, what it's going to come down to is the cost per placement. So then if they're making decisions on where to allocate funds based on cost per placement, and let's imagine that a lead source sent a lead 5 years ago and it was sent 20 other times by 20 different other lead sources, how do they break down that cost per placement so they know where to attribute funds? That's the tricky part.
Yeah, you're right. And as more people move to this model, it becomes more tricky. And I think, and that's why the really clear delineation of, look, so, well, what if we send it, if the candidate applied to 2 different platforms within a billing window, we have to send 2 checks. My answer would be yes. In a specific instance, yes, because it's the bad part of the deal that you have to do to get the good part of the deal, which is the fact that you're going to get thousands of them that continue to apply for years and years and years that you're not going to have to write any check to. So, it's the worst part of it, but there are plenty of counterbalances on the other side. Because then it gets super icky. Like, who, even if it's not time or attribution, whether it went to Vivian first or TravelNurseSource first or Youssef next, you don't know what the individual impact contribution is for each individual touch. Like, It gets silly. So at some point, it's like, if we can't agree who was the one that pushed the rock over the mountain, can we agree that we all help push it? And if we can agree there, then we can agree that we all take part in the success model.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with that. I think that's the right approach to it. I think there should be multiple attribution points. Like, you should record every single attribution throughout the lifetime of a lead. Yeah. And then there definitely are a kind of selection of sources that push the rock over the mountain, kind of should be attributed towards the placement. But at the same time, you should be tracking every single source. So if you received a lead 10 years ago, you should be tracking every single source along that journey to properly understand the value of different sources.
The other part to this too is, like, nefariously, you could make an argument for a company, for example, that would do the bare minimum on placement requirements on a pay per placement model, only to get past the billing window to ratchet it up and get them, and then not have to pay anything, right? If a
Right.
company was nefarious, I mean, they wouldn't get very far on the platforms because there's requirements set. But hypothetically, you could do just the bare minimum to stay on the platform, and then 6 months later, just go ham on these candidates for the next 5 years and make tons of
Yeah.
placements, not have to pay anything. But
Yeah.
that's not how the industry works. That's not how the platform works. But it is the counter punch to the, well, why do I have to pay you twice, or why do I have to pay you if we touch them? The counter punch is that you're going to have this massive database that you're going to be able to groom for the rest of your professional adult lives, and you're not going to have to pay anything for it. So I really feel like the healthcare staffing industry is not valuing that part enough, because to me, that's what keeps me up at night with this model, is the fact that I know the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars worth of revenue that are going to come from that database that we're not going to receive any money from. But
Yeah.
you are going to have to pay us for the ones that come within the billing window. So
Right.
people like to forget that part and just focus on this part, but it's huge.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, the onus has to come down to the vendor, so the lead source, to do proper evaluation of data to make sure that attribution is done correctly,
Yeah.
and fairly. So you have to kind of dig through all the data yourself as the vendor. You have to kind of compare it to the leads that have been sent, and the conversations that have happened on platform, and the date that it was sent, and the start date, and all these little data points
Yeah.
to make sure that attribution is done correctly and fairly. And that comes down to proper ATS integrations, the cleanliness of data from those integrations. But yeah,
We have, our part of our platform records phone calls for phone call tracking in certain plans. So if there's a number in our job postings, we'll swap them out for a number that we provide, right? And we attribute that phone call in their dashboards. They can see how many phone calls that we drove, because if they didn't apply but called, we want to receive attribution for that. We also get to listen to them, and we also get to share them, and the clients obviously have access to them in their platform. But I spend some time listening to them every once in a while, especially if there's an agency that's struggling. I want to see how their product is. Are they answering the phones? And it's amazing when you hear some of these, right? You will be listening to a phone call for somebody that was on TravelNurseSource calling, whatever, company A, and they're talking to a recruiter, and they'll say, "Where did you find this?" And they'll say, "Oh, I think I found it on Indeed." And I'm thinking, "No, you're on the platform calling the platform number. You're from us." And they're like, "Okay, well, mark it as Indeed." And so
right.
even beyond the API integrations and the data part, there's a massive human error component to this as
Yes.
well. And we have one client, the one that over attributed us to placements, right? Which, again, we love the bigger number, but we want to earn it. We said, how did this happen? How did this, what do you think happened? We know what happened. It's on our website where it says, where did you hear about us? And there's a drop down, and somebody mistakenly clicked you, and there you go. There's your attribution. So it's so nebulous and so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think once you get into very high lead volumes, that's where it becomes very error prone. So if you
Sure.
start sending thousands of leads a month, and there is a human touch to to that attribution, that's where it becomes very error prone. So you have
Yeah.
to make sure that the integrations are very tight, very clean, to do proper reporting on
Yeah.
attribution.
And that's why I feel like the platforms and the ATS have to be the arbiter of the truth, right? So,
Hmm.
they're almost like two versions of the same. It's like two versions of the same story. We have to take their version of the story, our version of the story, and mash them together electronically to show, okay, this is what you show, but this is what we show, and here's the background data, and here's your background data. And electronically, we should be able to at least get closer to the truth. And again, truth is nebulous in some way, with partners, because we could show them that we produced this, but they might have a different explanation for it, or a different, well, no, it was really
Yeah.
the billboard outside that did it, and
Yeah.
but data really can't lie. So that the more granular we get, the more we're able to wash it. I think that's the only way forward. I don't think the clients would feel comfortable taking completely 100% our data at face value unless we could mix it with theirs to show that the data is correct.
Absolutely. And then we've also had some partners that have leaned towards the cost per lead model because it is such a simple model.
Yeah.
It's very cut and dry. So especially larger staffing companies that have worked with Vivian and they've worked with them long term and
Hmm.
kind of have seen how attribution, the role of attribution play out over several years and how they
Yeah.
could over attribute placements and getting massive bills because of that.
Yeah.
They've decided to lean more towards a very cut and dry model that is cost per lead that has worked for decades, where there isn't this debate over attribution every month.
Right. You're right. It is cleaner. And, at the end of the day, we're going through this exercise with one of our partners now. We were looking at placements and what they spend with us. And it's cheaper than a Vivian cost per placement. And, they kept saying, clients really like this cost per placement model because it's no risk on their part. And I get it. There is no risk. But on the same hand, they're paying for that risk tolerance, right, or that risk threshold, one way or the other. And if they can execute on that, they'll end up on the great side of that. Um, but if they don't place, they're still generally paying something up front. So this notion of like, and I think Vivian has like, from what I understand, they have more of an upfront cost that's a little bit higher on their plans, depending on what you do. But clients will always talk about this as, well, we only pay if we place. And that's not true. You pay something whether you don't place. And we've had several
Right.
clients we've spoken to, especially now, they're upside down their Vivian contracts because they have to put, X amount of $1,000 down and they're not making enough placements to justify that. So they're upside down. So their cost per placement balloons double to what they're supposed to be paying.
Right.
Meanwhile, for example, on our platform, paying per lead and getting really, really targeted, if they're hitting a 1, 2, 3% conversion rate with us, their cost per placement is much, much lower. And to be
Yeah.
honest, if you bring in the previous leads, again, I'm a big fan of working a database, right? It's not all about who we're placing today from the leads we got today. It's farming your entire field. You know, if you factor those into the account, it gets even cheaper. I have a client right now with an $88.50 cost per hire
Yeah.
on TravelNurseSource. Now, this is a legacy client that's been with us a long time that has a lot of leads. It's doing a hell of a job with their nurture campaigns. But still, that beats Vivian all day long, you know?
I'd say if you're an organization that really understands your data,
Mm-hmm.
um, like really understands attribution, and you can nail down what the cost per placement is internally for you, I would probably favor a cost per lead model, not a cost per placement model,
Yeah. To
because
be,
you have enough data to make that evaluation and say,
yeah.
hey, I can control what channels I drive traffic from. And then based on that, I can control my cost per placement. But it requires a very smart marketing organization to do that math.
Yeah.
And that's why it's the risk debate, right? So
Yeah.
so the cost per placement model is if you want to play kind of throw your hands up in the air and be like, hey, I don't want to take risk on a lead source unless it drives placements. So
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the risk to the vendor. I'm going to give the risk to a cost per placement model like a Vetted or a Vivian, and
Mm-hmm.
then you guys take the risk on driving me placements, and I'm willing to spend a bit higher on the cost per placement model because I'm putting the risk on you.
Yeah.
But if you flip that table and you say, hey, I favor a
Yeah.
cost per lead plan, you are taking the risk. So you're saying, I
Sure.
am in control of my spend. I am in control of my data. I understand my data better than you understand it. So I'm going to take the risk on my end, pay cost per lead. And then I think I can drive a cost per placement that is lower than whatever you're pricing it at.
Yeah, and in some cases, when we offer a pay for placement model, I know there's clients that will never go there because it will be more expensive for them to cost per place than what they're getting on the platform paying per lead. And the other part to this that's interesting too, is that you're not guaranteed any sort of lead count generally on a cost per placement plan. And you know, present company excluded, generally the casino is going to always win. And, if you're not placing, you're going to see your lead. We've had clients whose leads volume have dramatically dropped, as their execution goes down in this market. Conversely speaking, too, if there's disputes on bills, lead volume automatically going down by 50% the next month. And,
Yeah.
from what I understand, there's no guarantee on how many leads you're going to get. So in that case, the platform has complete power and autonomy to really move the financial needle in the platform's favor so that
Yeah.
there's an equilibrium there. And again, that's that partnership trust type of thing. I'm not saying, obviously present company excluded, but, I think it's harder. I would imagine, I think you'd agree that it's much harder to budget as a platform profitability in that model because it's so
Much
dependent
harder.
on a third party.
Yes.
So I don't know. It's
And
harder all the way
placements
around.
placements are not predictable, right? So there are seasons,
Yeah.
and there's so many factors that contribute to placements on a monthly
Yeah.
basis. So I can't predict how many placements a company will get next month, even based on lead flow. So it's not like I can send 1,000 leads
Yeah.
and I can predict how many placements they'll get from that.
Yeah.
It's completely up in the air because of all these external factors at play.
Sure. And not just
And the
that
reality
too.
is, yeah,
Well, as I was saying, not just that too, but like not two staffing companies are the same, right? Like even just quality of recruiters and operational prowess. Like I said, we have phone call tracking. I spent some time the last couple of days listening to phone calls of an agency that wasn't necessarily doing very well on the platform, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. But after listening to these phone calls, you were just turned off. You were very much, it reminded you of going to like the driver's license center and applying for a driver's license. That's what it felt like. It starts with a 6 minute on hold time to get connected to somebody, 6 minutes on average.
yeah,
And then I heard the recruiter literally talk somebody out of an assignment who told them, oh, this is too low. You're probably not going to want this. You might as well go work at Dunkin'. That's what they told them. And then the guy goes, well, just tell me what it is. And she's even before she's told him about the assignment, she's talking about how poor this pay rate is. Like, and I get it, pay rates suck right now; they're really bad. But it's a sale. This is a sales centric organization or sales centric business. You can't lead with the bad. This guy still wanted
right.
to hear what the rate was, and once he heard it, he goes, "I've heard worse." And she said, well, why don't I call you when something better comes? He would have been submitted for it. But to your point, like that's even beyond operational prowess. Like, how are you going to quantify the ability of each recruiter to do their job either? So it's beyond the agency level. It goes all the way down to the people on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes down to training. I think what ended up happening was during COVID, there was this like COVID recruiter that
Yeah.
did very well in just taking submission packets that were completed from a platform like
Yeah.
a Vivian or a Vetted, and they took these submission packets and then they just kind of moved the papers around and tried to get the submission through.
Yeah.
That is just not the environment that we're in right now.
No.
Recruiters have to sell, and it's tricky because
Yeah.
especially like some stats that I hear within our customer base is that especially smaller staffing organizations that don't have
Yeah.
strong relationships with an MSP or direct hospital
Yeah.
relationships, it takes a lot of submissions to get a placement. So it might take you like 20 submissions to get a placement. And even if the VMS says they are vendor neutral, that's actually not true. Like it's dependent on relationships. So if you have a great relationship with an MSP program and the account manager of that MSP, and you put a submission through and you have their phone number, you can send them a quick text message saying, "Hey, I just sent the submission through. Can you please check it out and see if it's a good fit?" And your likelihood of getting that placement is going to be higher. So your submission to placement ratio is going to be better than other staffing companies.
Yeah, and
And
that
that's
tiering
mostly
system
the
too,
case,
like the tiering
right?
system
There's
as
a
well,
tiering.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So some staffing companies are tier one or tier two.
Yeah.
That tiering system also contributes to the submission to placement rate.
Sure.
So it gets really, really tricky because if you're a larger established organization that has a great reputation within MSPs
Yeah.
and you're a tier one, you're going to require less submissions to get a placement,
Sure.
which means that your cost per placement is going to be lower than other companies. And that creates like this really tricky environment because you can technically afford to spend more money on every lead because you know that your cost per placement is lower. So it creates a very competitive environment for smaller staffing companies where they have to find a way to win in other ways. And what that comes down to, I think, is relationships. So if you're a smaller staffing company and you don't have as much bureaucracy as these large staffing organizations, you should really kind of pound down on your recruiters and say, hey, try to build relationships, get on the phone. Like you're not a number. As a candidate, it's not just a submission, it's not just a placement. Try to build long-term, long-lasting relationships with your recruiters, and that's, I think, how you win as a smaller one.
It's interesting, right? So SA just came out. I saw their quarterly or whatever it is, this healthcare staffing thing, right? And they, the use of VMS as a primary source of revenue is up year over year, which is interesting. But it's like 75-80% or something like that of their income is VMS related. And when we were at TravCon, we were talking to some of the agencies who were just complaining about how saturated the VMS submission process is. And, they're submitting candidates, for positions that are done in hours, if not days. And they're one of, sometimes we've heard of over 100 submissions, or more for one position. 100. I mean, there's 200-300 travel nurse agencies. All of them mainly have the same similar VMSs. Most of them have the same. They all have the same jobs, generally speaking, and they're all submitting multiple candidates. So it is extremely competitive, and this is not fair to the smaller agencies. Like, let me just say this right now: it's not fair or right. But besides the relationships, they got to do things better, cleaner, and execute better than the bigger ones. Not more, but better. They have zero room for error. And on
Yes.
top of that, they're going to need more candidates. I know it's more expensive. I get it. Money's not free. But if you know that you're at a disadvantage because of your size, if you know that it's super, super competitive, you've got to hedge that competition with not just better quality, but more volume. You've got to take more shots at the apple because you know the other guys have a bigger bat. So
Absolutely.
you have to give it everything. And I'm not just saying that like go buy leads from Oliver and Youssef. Not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is work the database that you have. Use the resources at your disposal. Social media recruiting. I have clients now, like we have database access as part of our plans. You can go in and, snoop around a
Yeah.
database and, download it or whatever. So do you. And we have clients that will not do it because they say those are old leads. And I have clients that are making 20 placements a month just hitting that database. And some of these are smaller agencies who just are struggling in the market, but they won't use the tools that they're given
Yeah.
or their own database.
I think one way that you can build an advantage as a smaller staffing company when competing with a large staffing company. So you're going to naturally be at a disadvantage when it comes to job supply, and you're going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to the relationships with the VMS or MSP program. Your submission rate to placement is going to be much higher, more costly cost per placement compared to a large staffing firm. But I think the way that you build an advantage is by hiring recruiters that are hunters. And I think you can do that better than large staffing companies because you have more control over the commission structure for these recruiters. So a recruiter that works for a smaller staffing company, you could potentially give them more commission because your overhead is lower compared to a large staffing company.
Sure.
So if you're able to give them more commission, then you actually have a shot at hiring recruiters that are hunters that can go into a database and work leads better than the recruiters at a large staffing company.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of agencies employ some pretty aggressive sales training. I think of a few in Omaha that we've worked with that they brought in sales trainers and they retrained their entire COVID recruiting staff with some decent sales training for months. And it really made a difference, right? Focusing on relationships, focusing on the good, sales cycle, because that's what it is. But then also employing. So I've never seen so many people like really focus in on like re-engagement and like workflow efficiency as I have in the last 12 to 16 months, which is fantastic because, I remember we used to have clients that we'd send a candidate and it would, even with an integration, it would take 3, people to touch the candidate before it went to a recruiter. It could take a day or two. Well, by that time, A, the assignment's not there, and B, other people are probably calling the nurse. So, the fact that they're really geared down into moving quickly now, they've got the message, is
Yeah.
fantastic for us and their success.
Right, we see that too. I think a key to this is setting up a bunch of marketing automations. So, number one, make sure you're on an ATS that is a
Yeah,
popular ATS that has a bunch of the tools out of box that
yeah,
have proven to work with other staffing companies. So, Bullhorn is a great option, Labor Edge is a great option.
yeah,
And then once you have these ATSs, build out integrations with different tools,
yeah,
like a marketing automation tool or an SMS text message automation tool, so that when you're getting lead flow through an API, through the integration, you're able to send automated text messages really quickly. You're able to send automated emails really quickly, and you have a nurture campaign to work lead flow over a long period of time.
yeah,
So again, the number one reason that we see placements drop or not customers not be successful on our platform is because leads are not entering their ATS and they're not being worked because they're
yeah,
not entering the ATS. So
yeah,
if we send you 1,000 leads, but only 100 of them actually appear in your ATS, and
yeah,
even the 100, you don't have marketing automation set up for those 100 leads, then there's no way you're going to be successful because other
yeah.
staffing companies do have these automations.
So it's interesting too. You just reminded me. One of our partners. They were telling us that they don't they're on one of our competitors, and they don't, they're subject to a success a conversion rate that they have to hit to remain on that product. And they've tied, from what I understand, they've tied that to, syncing candidates into their database. So because they have to hit that model, they're not taking in all the leads. So unless they get a sure shot placement, someone that's it's going to happen today or tomorrow, they don't consume the lead into their ecosystem, which means they can't follow up, they can't re-engage. And, I was just thinking, what a waste. What a waste. You're telling me you have thousands of people applying to you and you're not bringing them into your database? Forget that unnamed partner and everything else like that. Like, go just to regular recruiting. Like, in what world is, what I mean, in today's recruiting? So I get why they're doing it. I understand why, because it's a source, right? But database every lead, database every lead, work every lead. You gotta nurture the farm. You gotta, what's the phrase? You gotta farm the crops, right? It's not just going to the store and buying. And when you look at some of these companies that are struggling, you go back and talk to them. Like, they have a lot of preconceived notions about how this should work, and a lot of these are nestled back from 2022. And the fact of the matter is, it takes much longer now to get a placement. It takes more phone calls to get a placement. It takes more candidates. You got to engage everything you have. Staffing Engine and Sense are the two big. I know Bullhorn has. I think they acquired. Who did they acquire? Was it Staffing Engine that Bullhorn acquired?
No, they didn't acquire Staffing Engine.
Or Sense.
They do have one.
Or
they didn't acquire Sense either.
I can't remember. They acquired somebody in that space, and I know Staffing Engine did a case study with GQR, and during their beta test, they used TravelNurseSource leads. And it's actually published. If you Google GQR Staffing Engine case study, you'll see it. They did just adding re-engagement to and it's not custom to us. It could have been vetted. It could have been anybody. They got a 5x increase in placements just from adding re-engagement. So there's a lot these little agencies can do. Like you said, they don't have the money and the manpower, but I'm sure they could afford a Sense account.
There's out-of-the-box solutions for this. You don't have to invent these solutions from scratch. You don't need a big engineering team to put these things in place. You could probably spend a week just focused on automations and get something together. And the reality is that a lot of these placements will result further down the line than immediately. So the birth of this COVID recruiter is somebody that's expecting a placement from the time they receive a lead. So you get a lead, you get them placed kind of the same day or the same week. But that's just not the reality of today's market condition.
It's not.
And not only that, you have to work leads long term.
And not only that, but what else I've been seeing? It's kind of an interesting pop-up as switching, kind of going back to re-engagement. Like, recruiters are looking at this being like, oh, wow, I can go to sleep and Sense or Staffing Engine or Bullhorn or whatever, Labor Edge, can hit up, whatever, 80,000 candidates overnight and send them job offers or send them, texts. I'm just going to sit here and wait for them to pop up. And so what we've been seeing in the data that we're consuming is this kind of profile of an agency that has a delayed hiring because they're waiting they've taken too many leads that they can possibly work. They are self-admittedly oversaturated in lead volume because they want everything. Yeah. But so they can't effectively work them. They go to long-term nurture or short-term nurture through re-engagement, and they sit there and wait for them to go to their website. And what we've been seeing is a lot of these placements happen 1 to 2 years later, but all via re-engagement. And I'm wondering if the recruiters are sitting there saying, I'm just going to wait, just like I'm just going to wait for them to apply on a site and come to a job and I'm going to place them that day. I'm going to wait for the same thing on the re-engagement side.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's definitely happening. I think the highest performing recruiters that we've seen are the ones that are on the phone. So ones that are picking up the phone, building relationships, recommending jobs on the phone, and they're salespeople. Like they know how to sell.
Yeah.
The ones that we've seen on Vetted, that because we have an unlimited plan that's cost per placement, and we've seen that because of that, especially small staffing companies, they will kind of view that as an advantage, which is, I'm going to get into this unlimited plan. I'm going to prospect thousands of leads. I'm going to just get the people that are lowest hanging fruit and try to convert them into placements. And oftentimes their conversion rate, their placement rate is lower than everybody else.
Yeah. And
that's because they believe that by getting extremely high volumes of leads, they are going to win just through a volume game. Yeah. But you're not going to win through a volume game. It's hunters. So you have to hunt lead flow. You have to be very specific in your targeting. You have to hop on the phone. You have to provide a service that's white glove that large staffing companies can't provide.
We have a shared client that just signed up with you guys months ago, and they didn't have their job feed going yet, and they were just hitting your database, just going to your database, and they made placements just off your database with not a single job on the site, right? To your point. So, because they were hunters, right? And same thing with us. We have clients that go in and hit the database. A good proportional placement metric by product for us is about a third, a third, a third. Third candidates, in-demand candidates, third job apps, third database. And if you're not, one of our partners right now refuses to go into the database, and we can see that they're missing. They would be getting 30 to 40% more placements, maybe 50% more placements. It just depends. Like you have to, like I said, you have to work everything you've gotten, but you have to be that hunter. And these candidates are not going to place themselves. And it is not, they're not applying for a driver's license. You have to go through a sales process.
Absolutely. And it also depends on the recruiting style of the recruiter. So some recruiters perform exceptionally well in a database. Yeah. Other recruiters get a bunch of their placements maybe through kind of referrals and maintaining their current book of business. Yeah. And then other recruiters only want ready submission packets to receive, and then they want to convert those. Yeah. Another thing that I found
that's not recruiting in my mind. Sorry to interrupt you. Like I gotta say, that's not recruiting. At that point, you might as well be trusted or and just nomad, and like that is not recruiting. You don't need someone to just push a button and move it through. Like recruiting is that sales centric tactic, right? And this whole thing of like order taking versus like actually recruiting is something that fires me up so much because it was never ever like this prior to like 2021, right? Like even before COVID, it started getting this way. This notion that just sit back and let the candidates, place themselves and you place them that day. Like it didn't happen before. It's not happening now. It was just it's a fluke part in the industry. But my God, have directors of recruiting and recruiters are holding on to this notion for dear life, and it's costing them dearly.
But we've seen a huge change in the market, I'd say, over the last 12 months because companies have been hurting. Like they've noticed, hey, we're losing money. We're not getting the number of placements that we were getting during COVID. So we have to turn over our staff. We have to either turn them over or we have to retrain our existing staff to the recruiting style that is effective in today's market condition. So we've seen a bunch of turnover across large staffing organizations because they hired a bunch of recruiters during COVID. And these recruiters were trained on certain processes that currently don't work. They were not salespeople, and they realized we need salespeople in order for us to have a stable business long term. So they turned over their staff, they fired a bunch of recruiters, and they had to rehire their teams to be these hunter type recruiters.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, so that's a good segue. Let's segue into kind of like what agencies need to do to be successful from a market dynamics / operational standpoint in this day and age, right? Because, I feel like there's clients and partners that we have that it doesn't matter how many leads we send to them, there's operational issues in place, transitional issues in place that are stopping them from reaching their full potential. And, I think you and I have kind of seen the gamut here. Like, what are some things that we can share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when it comes to market dynamics, what I've seen be very popular. I'm not sure yet if this is actually going to work. The reality is that the job supply for nursing has contracted. So there's a lot fewer jobs, and because there's a lot fewer jobs, it's become extremely competitive among staffing companies. So what I've seen happen is that a lot of staffing companies think that there's kind of the grass is greener perspective, which is I'm going to branch out into allied, I'm going to branch out into therapy, or I'm going to branch out into locums, and that's going to be kind of a fruitful market that's much easier. What I'm noticing just in kind of early insights from our customers that have done this is that they realize, hey, these markets are actually very hard. It's very hard to build a locums business. And there's established players in the industry, and it's very expensive. And the lead sources are also very expensive because the bill rates on locums is much higher. So you have to spend a lot more per lead to get them.
Yeah. And what we found, like people are like, oh, we're going to go into allied, we're going to go into imaging, we're going to go into therapy, like, it's a cash cow. There's less, those bill rates are fantastic. And there's less agencies in that game than nursing, for example. But every single allied practitioner, you think of like a dosimetrist versus an imaging versus a therapist versus a social worker, like they're completely different, credentialing, completely different requirements. Like you have to be individually trained. Like with an RN, it's pretty it's pretty similar for the whole gamut. But on Allied, you can't go into it as if you're, just being a nurse recruiter,
Absolutely.
You
Yeah, and
can't.
the reality is like for allied, there's so many different subspecialties, so it gets
Yeah.
very nuanced. So if you're a recruiter that's not trained to do allied recruiting, it's actually very difficult, and you're going to lose against a recruiter that is focused on just allied,
Yeah.
or even better, if they're focused just on a subspecialty or a niche, a category of allied.
Yeah, like
So if I'm a
imaging.
recruiter that's just imaging,
Yeah.
and I'm an exceptional imaging recruiter, I'm going
Yeah.
to beat you every day if you're a nursing recruiter that's trying to branch into allied.
Yeah, and we see this, like I said, when we have call volume data, we would listen to the call volume. It's a lot of, I'm not quite sure. Here, can I get your phone number? Let me get back. Look, they've already gone. Like,
Yeah,
it's too
exactly.
late.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about phones and practices, I'm gonna give like the best advice ever here for like, and I hope every agency hears it, and they're gonna be like, no, duh, but like, answer your damn phones. Like, I can tell you that 80% of the calls from our platform are unanswered during business hours. Youssef,
Yeah.
that is astounding to me. You have a candidate that's active and interested and potentially qualified that is reaching out to you right now. Like, Youssef, they
Yeah.
can't even wait to be called back. They want to talk right now.
Yeah.
And you're going to put them on a 6-minute hold. You're going to send them to voicemail. We watch them hang up over and over again, and then we see that number go and call another agency or another agency until somebody answers because they want to talk to somebody. Do you want to talk about closing the loophole or filling the hole in the bucket? Answer the damn phones. And here's another thing. It gets me so fired up because it's such an easy thing to do. Here's another good example. Ruby receptionist for $500 a month. Have it answered professionally 24 hours a day to take a lead volume, a lead form, even if your recruiter's not there. All these people are hanging up. Grab the data, call them the next day. It's better than not answering at all. Like, to me, this
Yeah.
is like 101. So
I think
anyway,
what we
sorry I get
notice is
fired
that
up,
there's
but
there's yeah there's a bunch of lead flow that comes in after hours,
yeah,
and most recruiters are just working 9 to 5 jobs, which is understandable.
yeah,
But there's a significant amount of lead flow happening after hours, and the reason being is because most nurses or allied professionals are working during day hours. So at least half the population, or if not more, is working daily shifts during the day. So they're not on sites applying to jobs during the day. The only time that they can kind of contact recruiters and apply to jobs is after hours. So they're not working the same hours as a recruiter. So we've seen some tactics be employed by staffing companies, like they'll hire kind of an offshore Filipino team or whatever else,
yeah,
so that they can manage the after hours lead flow.
sure.
We've
Another
seen
great
that be
idea.
very effective because, like, if you are answering the phone and you're very attentive and trying to build relationships after hours, you're going to beat out other staffing companies that are not working after hours.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it. I think it's like LRS is a good example. Like, they answer their phones. Like, they don't even have they don't have an automation. Like, there's no press one. Like, you answer, hey, it's John the recruiter. How can I help you? And it's immediate. Like, we
Yeah,
need to get to that because
yeah,
like inbound, like fresh inbound is your highest quality caliber of candidate. And you know, if they can't even wait for you to call them back, they're a shoe in. They want that job so bad they called you on the phone. Answer
right.
it.
Yeah,
Answer it.
absolutely.
The other thing too is, like, if we're going to basics here, let's talk about like garbage in, garbage out mentality, right? So if you're, when you're feeding vetted or TravelNurseSource, if you're feeding us data in, like mainly jobs, right? I want every agency to know that it's a piece of marketing collateral. Like, if put some effort into it. Like, I know there's technical considerations here as far as whether it comes from job robotics or comes from direct from the VMS or ATS or limited technical resources, but we have literally clients that send jobs with like wrong pay rates, wrong descriptions. We have them in the title, they're looking for an ER nurse, and in the description they're asking for a sonographer. Like,
Yeah,
we're good. Don't get me wrong. Vetted, you're good. TravelNurseSource, we're good. We're not that good where we can bring somebody in and have
yeah,
them be confused between a sonographer and an ER, RN on the same
yeah.
posting. Like, no one's going to apply to that. So
The worst
it's
of one that we've seen is that a lot of staffing companies, we used to notice this a lot. It's
yeah,
kind of it's lessened now, but they'll have specialties that just say RN and that's
yeah.
it.
Or other,
and
my
just nothing
favorite,
else.
other. Yeah.
Yeah, just nothing else. And or even they'll have some weird acronyms and just believe that somebody's going to understand
Yeah.
what this acronym means,
Yeah.
and that it's a universal kind of acronym that everybody uses.
Yeah.
And
And
most of the time, that's because recruiters are manually entering in titles,
yeah.
and you have manual job titles in your system. And
Yeah.
if we get that, there's no way we're going to know who to attract talent to. Like,
Yeah, and not to mention too, like, whatever the endpoints are for the platforms, as far as other things you can put in there that we can pull in and ingest. I'm thinking like shift or type of makeup of shift, like 3x4 or 40x3, whatever. Like we have clients that don't send us those, and because it's a little extra work for them, it's a lot of extra work for them with their systems to get them in. But here's what happens: if your data is incorrect or you're missing schema, right? Filtering doesn't work, right? If people go, most of these candidates like to filter, like they want to look just for night shift. They want to look for certain terms. They want to look for this, that, and the other thing. If you're not feeding platforms that specific data, it's not good enough to be like, well, our jobs are on the site if they can't find them. And you know what they can
absolutely.
find if you're not there? Your competitors, So I really think it's important for clients and partners to really, work with us to kind of get to level ground, get back to basics, get all this stuff up and running before they start worrying about all the fancy stuff. Like, do your jobs look good? Do they have the information? Are they convertible? We have metrics. We look at what our average is for, converting as far as jobs or click-through rates and things like that. And we have a benchmark that we use when we're talking to our clients. This is what our average client converts at. This is what you're converting at. Let's look at why.
Yeah.
Let's pull out somebody that's converting at 25%. Let's take you at 3%. Let's look at the two jobs, and give them examples. And but even, and then clients will be like, oh, great, so we just need to redo our jobs. Yes, but it shouldn't have taken 3 years to have this conversation. Like you're missing a description. You don't have anything in the description except come work for us. Like you got to give us, we're a marketing platform. You have to give us something that we can market, so.
And this issue applies to all lead sources that you try to use. So it's not just us. Like if you try to go on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever else, like beyond individual job postings where you're manually posting them one by one, if you want to post jobs at scale, you need some kind of feed with quality data. Otherwise, you're not going to get any traffic.
Yeah, we've always said, look, if you can raise your click-through rate or you can raise your conversion rate by 20, 30, 40% with us, and we can show you that working with us to get your jobs in a better position is a 20% lift, my God, roll that out across your entire ecosystem, because you know what's going to happen? You're going to get a 20% lift everywhere. And what happens if you get a 20% lift in placements for the same amount of money?
Yep.
You're gonna get a promotion. So you have to do it, And lastly too, while we're on the working with us category, I'm going on a rant here, sorry, Youssef, but I want to say this too. I was thinking about this. I want our partners to hold us as platforms more accountable and really work with us as a partner, right? So what does that mean? What am I saying? Like we will have clients that, if all is well, we never hear from them. And I think that's a mistake. I think you should engage us in good times and bad times. And I think partners should challenge us and ask us the question, Oliver, Youssef, what am I doing that my competitors are doing? What could I be doing better? 9 times out of 10, we're going to have an answer for you. But if you're not asking the question, or you're not answering the call, or you're not engaging with your partners, you'll never know and you'll never do it. You and I, between the two of us, work with hundreds of travel nurse companies or travel therapy companies, locum companies. I've been doing this for 15 years. We got a couple things we could make mention, even just from looking at our complement of clients. We could make recommendations. But if we're not engaged in that capacity, and by the way, I think I speak for you when you'd be more than willing to do it as well, right? Yep. So, but the clients have to ask. They have to be willing to receive that information. And it's the freest thing you could do that would give you the biggest lift. Just ask. Yeah. Be present. So
nice. I think we're at time. Anything else you want to chat about?
No, I just want to. Sorry for going on a couple rants. I got a lot of pent up. No,
I love it. I love it. I think this is great.
I mean, ultimately, I speak for both of us, where the passion, the emotion comes from us really wanting to be a positive change agent to our clients, right? You and I are in this business, and why we've had such a good relationship here is because I feel like we share very similar ideals on the impact we want to leave on the world, right, and the impact we want to leave on our clients, and we hold that as a responsibility. And it can be very, very difficult. And frustrating as a partner to be able to see how you could help somebody, but you can't get them to see it. And I think us as partners, we want to help. We want to make our clients successful. We're not in this just to make money, unlike some of our competitors. We're in it to be profitable, yes, but we really do want to make a better industry. We do want to leave our mark here. Would you agree?
Absolutely agree. 100%. Yeah.
So everybody who's watching this video, I want you to go get a vetted account and a TravelNurseSource account, and you know what to do after that.
Exactly.
Very good. Cool.
Cool.
Awesome. There you go.